Yesterday, I watched Trump's address to Congress so that you didn't have to. All right, you're welcome. Almost none of it was worth talking about, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things that I think might matter going forward. Welcome to the Homeless Conservative Daily. At least that's what I'm calling this temporarily. If you've got any name suggestions, I'm open to them. I'm going to highlight the most important things that happened yesterday in U.S. politics so that you can be the smartest person in the room today. That's the simple fact. And I don't really think that much mattered in this speech tonight. So if you're not aware, there is a joint address to Congress where basically the president gets up and does basically the State of the Union, but in an inauguration year. It's not called the State of the Union because he's only been president for a few weeks, and so they call it a joint address to Congress. But it's the same thing. It's all of the Senate, all of the House is there, the cabinet members, the Supreme Court, everyone's basically there except that one cabinet member who has to sit in a room somewhere else in case, I guess, a giant meteor hits the Capitol, and we need the lone survivor. There's a Kiefer Sutherland show about this, right? So everyone's there, and it's the longest, I think, version of this speech that we've had in modern history. It's like 2 hours long, and it was mostly a Trump campaign speech. That's really what you need to know. You could go back and look at any of the campaign speeches from 2024, and this is essentially the same thing, except that he had a whole part at the front about all the executive orders that he had already signed. That was really it. It was the same shtick. It was even sort of the audience back and forth, and you can tell when he's reading the prompter, and then you can tell when he's riffing. And it's what we expect. Although, during a campaign, fine, it makes sense. But now he's the president, so it does feel like maybe it should have a little bit more substance. That's maybe just me, I guess. I don't know that anyone else is demanding that. Here's the only interesting things that happened during it. And the only two things I want to talk about are the Democrats, first of all. Democrats had a mixed reaction as far as some of them were doing the holding of signs. A bunch of the female congressional representatives were wearing pink for some reason. I'm sure for some reason, abortion rights or something, who knows. A lot of them had these little signs that said like false. They would hold up, and Representative Al Green gets kicked out. He's from Texas because he looked quite literally, I should get a picture of it up here. I'll put a picture up here, maybe in post editing, of him. It literally looks like the old man yelling at clouds from The Simpsons. It looked so much like it. It was comical. And, most of these people are doing this sort of protest thing because, they put it on the website the next day and they send out an email and they do fundraising off of it. And to me, it just seems very not effective. It's very clear to me that the Democrats do not have a plan. They do not have a way to, there seemed to be a lot more coordination in the first Trump presidency as far as trying to oppose him. And that does not seem to exist now because I think you've got some people. It should be noted that mostly the people that were wearing T-shirts or protesting were in, at least from the sources that I was reading and stuff, or, most of these people are the progressive people that you would expect. They're in very, very blue districts. They're not in any danger of being losing their seat to a Republican. They're worried about losing their seat to a more liberal Democrat is essentially what the problem is. But, the Chuck Schumers and the Nancy Pelosi's, they weren't holding up the signs. They weren't doing any of this protest stuff. So there seems to be a pretty clear divide in the Democratic Party as far as how to handle this. And there's several of the further left people are kind of going, you've got to fight harder. And I think some of these people are trying to prove that they're fighting hard because they don't really have anything to do in Congress. Because first of all, Donald Trump's not really doing anything with Congress. He only mentions Congress a couple of times in the entire speech that was 2 hours long, like I mentioned. He asked them to pass the extension of his tax cuts from 2017. And, that was kind of it. There really wasn't a lot of, here's the legislation I want. We need to pass this, and we need to pass this, and we need to do this. And he did ask them to repeal the CHIPS Act. That was the other thing I think he asked. But I think those are the only two things that he specifically asked Congress to do. And I think he also said he needed money for deportation stuff. I think that there were really only a few things where he was like, I'm calling on Congress to do these things. And I think that's mostly because it was, like I said, a campaign speech. It wasn't like he was talking about his legislative agenda or what he wanted to do for the next year or the next 2 years or the next 4 years. it's not that he didn't highlight some of that stuff, but it was mostly braggadocious about the executive orders he'd signed so far, which again should be noted that if a Democratic president gets elected in 2028, can just undo everything he does with an executive order. So I would have liked to see, if I'm Donald Trump or if I am in his administration, what I'd like to see is Donald Trump go, look, I've signed all these executive orders. I think these are good starts. However, we need to make them permanent. We need Congress to step up and actually pass these as laws so that Democrats can't just unsign them the next time they're in the White House. I guess maybe sometimes people don't like to admit that. Maybe there's a future where the other party will be in power, but it's pretty foolish at this point when we've just been ping-ponging back and forth 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024, Democrat, Republican. And it's pretty clear that that is sort of a pattern that's been going on. And we keep flipping the House and the Senate too. So it was interesting to watch the Democrats continue to be sort of aimless in what they're supposed to do. Some people protesting, some people not. The most interesting thing to me was at one point, Donald Trump was kind of going through the thing that we do at these State of the Union sort of addresses where there seems to be a 30-minute break where they just recognize these normal Americans and tell their story. And I feel a little grumpy about it, but I really hate it. It just doesn't land well for me. It feels very performative, and it feels really, I'm trying to think of the right word to say. It feels like taking advantage of someone that has normally a tragedy in their lives. Because, for example, he has the guy who actually died at the campaign rally where he was attempted to be assassinated and had his family there. And it just felt like a little bit about Trump and not about him in a way. And then there was a pretty cute part where they had this kid that had a brain tumor and has lived much longer than doctors originally said, and he always wanted to be a police officer, and so they deputized him with a Secret Service badge, and it was cute. But like, I just don't know that we need that at this address. That seems like more of a thing that you could just do as a photo op on the White House lawn or something. But the interesting part really to me was that at one point he was talking about going through those people, and there were two things that were interesting. One was they talked about Mark Fogel, who is an American citizen who's detained in Russia. And what was really interesting about it is that Trump didn't really mention that Russia are the bad guys here for detaining Americans who are innocent of all the crimes they are convicted of in Russia, so that Russia can use them as a bargaining chip to get someone like a warlord back or an arms dealer back from us. So we have to do one of these like prisoner swaps sort of things. And it was just interesting to me that Donald Trump basically in that moment didn't really call out Russia for being the bad guys in that situation and doing that to us. Whereas I think the president of the United States should say, and if any country does this to any American citizen in the future while I'm the president, you will have hell to pay. That to me is the response that the president should have. And it was just more like, look at this guy I got back, but we're not going to really talk about why Russia's the bad guys for detaining him in the first place. And then, by the way, doesn't really mention China at all tonight. I think that's also interesting. Doesn't mention Iran, only mentions Israel when he's talking about doing our own sort of version of the Iron Dome missile defense. He mentions that Israel has the Iron Dome missile defense, but he doesn't mention the war. He doesn't mention, he talks about the Russia-Ukraine war for a little bit, but just basically we want to end it because it's a tragedy and it's got to end, but he doesn't really talk about the details of it. And I just think it's interesting that he didn't really talk about any of our geopolitical, the things that he is going to be required to solve or at least deal with in his presidency. And to me, I don't know if that is him trying to me, it seems like he's trying to not think. It's like, if I don't talk about it, it's not there. And I think we need leaders that are willing to talk about the hard things that they're going to have to do in this country. And like, the truth is we are going to face, presidents always have to face geopolitical problems. Events happen, right? And to me, it seemed like 2 hours of Donald Trump ignoring that those kind of things could possibly happen to him. And he kind of got lucky in his first term, and a lot of them didn't. Although he had some real wins foreign policy-wise. The Abraham Accords are significant. But it was just interesting to me that he didn't mention China. He didn't mention Iran. He didn't really mention Israel. He didn't really mention a lot of these things that are bubbling over and boiling, and he is going to have to deal with. So that was interesting to me. The really only other thing that was interesting is that he did talk about tariffs, and I know you're going to be tired of me talking about tariffs, but I just think they're really dumb. It's a really dumb idea, and I will die on that soapbox. But specifically, I think what's dumb about what Trump is doing here is that he talked about the tariffs. He talked about additional tariffs, not just the 25% on Canada and Mexico, but he's going to do these sort of reciprocal tariffs on any country that has a tariff on us. We're going to put the same tariff on them. Now, that is interesting because most people have tariffs on specific kind of goods. And so normally those are things that we don't need from them, but they need from us. And then we need things from them that we don't manufacture here. So I don't know how he's going to implement it, but he said he's going to do this worldwide on anyone that's doing tariffs with us. And I think that's coming on April 2nd, he says. So this will inevitably raise prices, as I mentioned on yesterday's show. It's gonna raise consumer prices. It is going to be people are going to notice that 25% hike in the price of whatever they're buying. And what I think was kind of interesting about it was that he specifically talked about farmers and how I think the actual line that he said was he prefaces this talk about tariffs as "bear with me," because I think he knows this is going to hurt farmers, because the very first thing that most of these countries are going to do, including Canada and Mexico, are going to slap our farmers with taxes, import taxes on their stuff. And because we export a lot of our food, a lot of it. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that most of the farm stuff, like the wheat, for example, that we grow, I think like something like 75% of it, don't quote me on that number, but something like 75% of it is exported. Well, if they start slapping tariffs on that, that's going to devastate farmers. And in fact, the last time he did tariffs, pretty narrow tariffs on steel and aluminum in his first term, we had to bail out farmers. I say had to bail out farmers, but he chose to bail out farmers because it was heading into an election year so he could get elected again. To the tune of like $28 billion that we spent in taxpayer money bailing out farmers who were only not able to make money because Trump imposed tariffs on other countries, and then those countries imposed tariffs on us, and it hurt farmers the worst as far as a single industry that got kind of hammered worse than other ones. And so we had to bail them out. So it kind of makes that tariff money not really worth it. I think we got a total of something like $80 billion in tariff and had to spend $28 to $30 trillion or billion dollars. Sorry, it was $80 billion and something like $30 billion that we bailed out the farmers with. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it was interesting to me that he hedged and said, "Bear with me." And then he said, "Have fun." I think he knows there's going to be problems with farmers specifically, and that's just one industry that there's going to be a problem with. So, I think that's really all that happened in the whole speech that is worth talking about. I really don't think there was much else. I'm sure you'll see clips around today. There were a couple parts that he was genuinely funny. He's actually pretty good at that sometimes. He made a joke when he was talking about the Doge cuts that was like, X amount of dollars to this, and no one knows what that even is. And it was pretty funny. But for the most part, it was just kind of self-congratulatory. It was, look at all the things I've done. It was a lot of hyperbole, the best ever, the worst ever. He claimed he was the best president, and the second best president was George Washington. He claimed that this was like some sort of scientific survey that was taken. It's just not what I think people in America need or want to hear. I also don't think most of them pay attention to it, because most people aren't dorks like me and watch a 2-hour speech by Donald Trump to Congress with all the Republicans standing every 2 minutes and clapping for him and the Democrats sitting there folding their arms. And it felt kind of embarrassing, honestly. So that's really all you need to know. I think there's really not much else. I think we'll talk more about the tariffs. We'll see what happens today with those. We'll also see what happens with the retaliatory tariffs that we're going to get from Canada and Mexico. They've announced that yesterday that they are going to bring those by this weekend. So we will know more by the end of the week of not only the pain that you're going to pay, but also the pain that the companies you work for are going to feel when they can't export their stuff for, they're just not going to be able to export as much stuff anymore. So we will see what happens, but that is really what you need to know today. And then feel free to hop into the comments and ask me any questions that you have for tomorrow's show, and I will get to those. But that's it. I will talk to you tomorrow.